Good afternoon. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this session, this panel session for Dive In 2022 that I am very excited to be a part of. The focus of today's panel is authenticity. And what does it mean to bring your true self, your authentic self to work? And just so we're working with the same definition, we'll talk about authenticity, being able to express yourself, your culture, your values, and your beliefs in a genuine way. Today we have 4 panelists who, I can tell you, I have rarely seen such bravery in discussing with panelists and the willingness to be vulnerable. So I think you will be blown away, and I think that you will come away with a newfound respect for each of our panelists today. I know, in fact, I did. First of all, we have Kyle Masters. Kyle is a partner at Carey Olsen in the dispute resolution team. Born and raised in Bermuda, he has been a member of the Bermuda Bar since 2009. Kyle has worked in London and Hong Kong. He is also a member of the Barclay Institute Board of Governors. Outside of work, Kyle enjoys spending time with his wife, Leanna, and 2 children, Dalla and Amari. And I have to, 10 and 7, and I remember when they were born. I cannot believe that they are this age already. He keeps his weekends and holidays full of pancakes, joy, and adventure. Next to Kyle, we have Megan Green. Megan is a partner at PwC Bermuda, providing services to predominantly global fund managers, fund structures, and ILS vehicles. She is a Bermudian who has been in public accounting for 18 years, working in both Bermuda and Australia. She also serves as the inclusion and diversity leader for PwC Bermuda. Megan will be sharing her journey through infertility and infant loss today and explore how she was able to bring her authentic self to work after the tragic loss of her son, Ethan. And I have to tell you, it was Megan that reached out to me about this panel. And when I learned a little bit more about Megan and her story, it was the first time that I ever heard anybody have the courage to speak about infant loss in public. And I knew automatically that this was something that I wanted to be a part of. So thank you, Megan, for organizing this panel. And next to Megan, we have a formidable woman and somebody I am pleased to call a friend, Natasha Scotland-Courcy. Natasha serves as Chief Operating Officer, General Counsel, and Secretary of Athene Life Re Limited, and has almost 20 years' experience as a corporate attorney, with 15 of those being in the reinsurance industry. Natasha has been with Athene for the past 10 years and works with Athene's business units to manage its reinsurance transactions, including acquisitions, strategic transactions, reinsurance arrangements, and alternative structures. Prior to joining Athene, Natasha was at a publicly traded property and casualty company serving as their Associate General Counsel. She was also recently appointed as the chair of Bermuda International Long-Term Insurers and Reinsurers BILTER. Congratulations, Natasha. Natasha will be speaking on her truth of what being authentic in the workplace has looked like for her as a Black West Indian woman in international business, and how her experiences have shaped her journey. And next to Natasha, we have Trevor Staehely. I hope I said your last name
You
right.
did.
I meant
You
to ask you
Staehely.
before we sat down. I forgot. Trevor, I was pleased to meet Trevor, and I have to tell you, Trevor, as a senior manager at PwC Bermuda, when we were having this discussion, said something to me that made me pause and think, and if you don't bring it up, I will actually bring it up after you finish speaking. But it really made me think about how we choose to show up and present every day. Trevor has a wide breadth of industry experience, including, most recently, financial services clients with a focus on PCAOB audits. I'm not even going to act like I know what that is, for SEC registrants. He has worked in public accounting for 8 years in both the US and London before relocating to Bermuda. Trevor is an inclusion and diversity steering committee member at PwC Bermuda, and will be sharing his story as an out LGBT professional in the workplace and how authenticity can be a catalyst for success. First, so I guess the first thing I will do is say that this is probably not going to be like most of the panels that you've seen, in that it is less of a discussion and more of a storytelling journey through people's experiences. First, we will start off with Kyle. And what we really want to hear from you with, Kyle, is your journey to authenticity, what that meant to you, challenges that you faced along the way, and how you overcame them, and do you feel like you have successfully overcome them?
Sure, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Tawana. So I suppose with all journeys, the best place to start is the beginning. My mother and my father to a degree as well. I was lucky enough to have both in the home, but my mother had a very direct way and steel doors of communicating with me. My dad more by example. But they both communicated the same thing, which is you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Now, that was true for them. They did what they thought was best when they were bringing up their son. And so that meant that my margin for, I went through life believing, and in some ways having it demonstrated to me, that my margin for error was much thinner than maybe my white counterparts. And so as you sort of progress through your career, you are invited and a lot of times given the opportunity to take risks. At one stage in my career, I was invited to become the acting chief executive of an organization. And it was a great time. I felt that I was prepared and ready for the role. And during that time, I felt I grew, but the board decided to select another person to take over as full-time chief executive. That person didn't last. I think they lasted about 8 months, and the board invited me again to be interim chief executive. And I had a direct conversation with the board, and I said, look, guys, I really appreciate the opportunity, but this is the second time you come around. I want this shot. I feel like I have what it takes. And there were two conversations going on in my mind when that was happening. The outward conversation was projecting confidence. It was Kyle saying, I have what it takes. I can do it. I had spoken with other professionals and friends, and we'd sort of developed, not a script, but sort of the points that I would make. But internally, I was always thinking, they're not going to select me. Like, there were a number of reasons. At that time, I was maybe 30. I was Bermudian. All of the other people who had been there before me were older white males. Most of the people who came after me were older white males as well. But they had long experience in the game. I didn't. It was a specific industry that I had some experience in, but I just felt I could, where I lacked in certain things, I could make up in others. I had real relationships with the people that we were managing. In any event, I said, look, you know, this is sort of what I'd like to do. And basically I said, look, if you choose me to be interim, I'll do it, but if I'm not made permanent, I'm not going to be happy. 6 months later, they were like, look, we're not going to make you permanent. We're going to bring in a guy from Canada. And I was like, so they asked me, they said, well, what do you think? Well, you know, how do you feel? Which is not a question that I was often asked coming up. How do you feel? And I answered, and I said, well, I'm disappointed. And that didn't go over well. I was roughed up. And then basically, I ended up leaving the organization. But when I left, one of the decisions that I made, which I think, I don't know what led me to make it, but I actually went to see a therapist. So this was, oh man, it's almost 6, 7 years ago now, right? And what he said to me was really interesting. He didn't say, oh yeah, well, you know, they didn't pick you because you were young, or they didn't pick you because you were black, or they didn't pick you because you were Bermudian. He said, yeah, all of that's cool. You are missing some stuff that you need to get your mind around. You're not playing politics well enough. You are not pushing the envelope where you should, and you're not taking the risks you should. And that caused me to reflect on my upbringing, the things that my parents had taught me, and why I felt like my margin for error was so little, which is why I wouldn't take the risks, why I wouldn't push back, all of these things. Basically, in a nutshell, he said, look, you're not going to get far doing all the right things. That's not enough. That's never been enough for anyone. You have to figure out where the risks are, where the gray areas are, and push. And so I suppose, in a way, the very thing that got me far along in my career, which was doing the right thing, being in the right places, and not letting people down, was also the thing that made me an unattractive candidate for leadership. Not because those things are good, but because it's that additional. It's being willing to push back and have that conversation. And that, for me, is where I think a lot of professionals struggle. And, you know, if you gave it a term, you might call it imposter syndrome. But it's not in the sense that you don't feel like you belong there. It's almost as if you feel like you are there, but you don't want to push it. Like, don't push it. Because if you push it, these people might tell you to go. Thankfully, where I currently work, that's not that much of an issue. It's all self-imposed. It's in my mind. It's things that I deal with. But no one is discouraging me from pushing the envelope. No one is discouraging me from swinging at whoever I need to swing at. I'm a litigator, so that comes with the territory. And they have my back every time. There have been times where I've messed up royally, and they've had my back. There have been times where I thought I messed up royally, and they're like, no, we're not putting up with this. Let's go. We're going to war. That's important. But that's sort of the struggle that I've had, and I'll probably continue to have, but something that I've been able to build on.
I just want to thank you for sharing it, and thank you for being transparent. And I wanted to pick up on two things that you said, and the first was therapy. And for many people in the audience, you'll be aware that there can be a stigma, especially in the Black community, about seeking therapy and outside help. So what made you decide to take that step, and what gives you the confidence to share now that you took that step?
I was acting up, is the short answer. Like, I was losing weight. I wasn't putting appropriate focus on my family. And my wife was like, what's going on? Like, what is happening here? What has changed? You need to figure it out, which was all fair comments. And I actually had a friend who was a therapist, was a trained clinician. And he was like, look, I think you should talk to somebody. My mom comes from a medical background as well, so I didn't have that sort of stigma.
Yeah.
So that's to answer that question, which was I needed to do something, and it wasn't within me. The reason why I share it now, I don't know. I can't say I've ever shared it publicly, but it was helpful.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if it can help other people, it works. You know? And it's not like this magic bullet either. It's legitimately putting up a mirror to you and saying, why do you think that's happening? And I didn't like it, but it was helpful.
Thank you for sharing that. And then the second thing I wanted to ask you is pushing the envelope, taking risk. And, you know, just as your parents told you, I'm sure a lot of people in here heard the same thing, right? Twice as hard, half as far. And you accepted that it's the lot in life. So if you've grown up with that mentality, but then you realize I have to take risks, when and how did you get comfortable pushing the envelope when you are afraid of being scrutinized more than the next person who's doing that? Can you think of something that gave you the confidence?
Yeah, I had mentors. So when I joined Carey Olsen, which is now going on 4 years ago, I worked and still work closely with Keith Robinson, who's in the room today. And I remember one time there was he may not even remember, but we had a back and forth of an email with another lawyer. Mm-hmm. She was clearly wrong, but my inclination was not to push, because I was like, well, what am I going to win? Like, why would I push back on this particular point? It seems, you know, menial. Why would I do it? And he was like, you have to mark her card, because the next time she comes down the next time she comes down the flank, she's just gonna keep pushing into your, you know, to use a football analogy, she's gonna keep crossing into your box unless you tackle her higher up the field. And I was like, it makes a lot of sense. So I did, and immediately the respect changed. Yeah. And so now you can figure out, you can pick your battles. That's one example. Mm-hmm. But Carey Olsen's whole ethos, by the way, is about pushing the envelope and swinging big. So if you're not with that, you'll be uncomfortable. And so you end up in an environment where that's expected, encouraged, and protected. And so I think that's important as well.
Thank you for sharing, and I think that also emphasizes the value of allyship, which is not the focus of this panel, but I'm sure it's been discussed much in Dive-In this week. And now we'll turn to Megan. And Megan, much like our other panelists, you gave me food for thought, because when we think about code switching, which is trying to fit into a dominant culture or a dominant view by changing your behavior, your actions, or even the way that you present, we often think of it as something outward. So, you know, your voice, your hairstyle, whatever the case might be. But it wasn't until speaking with Megan that I thought about code switching in another way, which is if there is an accepted version of a family and there are accepted conversations that you have, the minute that you may say something that indicates that, listen, my experience isn't like yours, you run the risk of making people uncomfortable, of making yourself uncomfortable. And it was not something I ever thought about in that way before, as something that may be less apparent. And so, Megan, can you tell us your journey and how you managed going back into work, but also can you tell us a little bit about why you started the My Truth campaign at PwC?
Yep. Yeah, no, definitely, and thanks, Tawana. And you're absolutely right. When we think about D&I and authenticity, it really manifests itself in many different ways, and I think we've seen a lot of evidence of that just this week. If you've been lucky enough to attend the other panels, we're all talking about the same topic, but what we're saying is very different, and we come at it from different angles and perspectives, which is probably shaped by our own personal experiences. And for me, the lens I want to shine on authenticity is that concept that true workplace authenticity means you can show up to work and you can communicate your hopes, dreams, fears, and struggles in a way that you will receive support, empathy, and respect. And to give context, why that's so important to me. So my journey, my husband and I struggled with infertility for 3 years. We had to do IVF. Through that process, I got pregnant with our daughter Tegan, but I developed severe preeclampsia early on in the pregnancy, and we had to deliver our daughter at 29 weeks, which was incredibly scary. It was very touch and go. We couldn't hold her for the first 3 days. And luckily, that's a happy story. And after a 2-month stint in the NICU, we did bring her home, and she's a happy, thriving 4-year-old, which I know we're lucky because there are a lot of women that have gone through my journey that can't say that. So I know we are blessed. We did another round, and I got pregnant with our son, Ethan. And unfortunately, very much the same happened, but I got sicker faster. And so we had to deliver Ethan at just 23 weeks, weighing just 0.83 a pound, so it wasn't even a pound. And unfortunately, there was just too much against him at that level of prematurity, and he passed away at 2 weeks. So, he put up a good fight, but sadly, we lost him. And after that journey, my husband and I were always on the same page, luckily, and we knew we wanted more children. I, particularly as a mother, felt this was Ethan's legacy to, out of his death would come more life, and we had all these embryos sort of on ice from IVF, so we thought, we just need to find someone to carry, this baby. And so we went through a surrogacy journey, we found a surrogate, so a year later, just this past August, we finally got to implant one of our embryos, and it took, and we found out she was pregnant, and we were happy, and we got the next results, and everything was great, and I wish that I could end the story there, but that's not the way life goes, and we actually just found out last week that she miscarried, and so we are sort of in a holding pattern at the moment, processing it, working through with our surrogate, and then we'll go again sort of next year. But for me, there wasn't really a choice about bringing my authentic self to work. I had to, because for me, if I couldn't bring that journey, that tragedy, that event that shook me to the core and changed who I am, I wasn't going to process my grief. I wasn't going to be able to transition back to work. I wasn't going to be the professional I am today or the leader I am today. So I did it out of necessity. And really how that sort of manifested, like you, I spent a lot of time in therapy. I went every 2 weeks, and I highly recommend it. I basically worked through how this might look. And when I showed up at work the first week, there was a team meeting. I went to the organizer. I said, I'm hijacking this. I opened my mouth to speak, and just tears. I just didn't know what I was going to do. And then I just thought, hell with it, I'll just say my truth. So I said to the team, this is going to be awkward. You don't know what to say to me. You're terrified of saying the wrong thing. Look at me. I'm going to cry whether you say something to me or not. I cry every day. So it's fine, and you'll probably walk by my office, and I'll probably be crying, but I don't feel awkward about it, so you shouldn't feel awkward about it. And I laid it out for them. I said, while you're so worried about upsetting me, as a mother, as a grieving parent, my biggest fear is that you won't say anything, that everyone will just pretend Ethan didn't exist, and I can't let that happen. So, once I laid it out there, I walked away feeling better, so much so that night I remember posting on sort of my support networks, because a lot of times the questions come up, I've just miscarried and I have to go back to work and I don't know how to do it. And I posted my story, and I hope I inspired someone else to do the same. But coming on from that support group, I trolled through people's stories. I mean, my husband, who's here, laughed at me. I would just read and read and read all night people's stories. And for me, whilst I'm so sad that so many women have to go through this journey, I am so comforted that I'm not alone. And so I got so much out of hearing other people's stories. And because of that, I thought, how do I bring this support into the workplace? And so with the help of our I&D committee, we rolled out the My Truth campaign. And really what that was supposed to be about, it was just powerful storytelling, tell your truth, tell your story, and build connections that way and offer support. And I know after sharing my story, instantly one email popped back, and I can say it was from Stephen Ben, for anyone that knows him. He works at PwC. I did not know him before, but he just wrote back ditto. And he launched into his story about losing his twins at 23 weeks, 5 days old. And I said, can I call you? Got on a call. He was such a big element of my support network, and he then said, should we do this regularly? And so for a year, we've caught up every month for half an hour. And at the beginning, maybe it was really about helping me through the grief journey. But now we just talk about everything. Sometimes we don't even talk about the kids. But I think it was helpful for me to hear his support, and I think it was helpful for him to have that channel to talk about his children, because he probably doesn't get that often.
Yeah.
So
thank you for sharing that. You raised something interesting, and it came up in our discussion. Natasha, did you want to pick up on a piece of what Megan said in terms of when she went back to work?
Yeah, it is such a powerful story, but what resonates a lot for me is the power of your vulnerability, because vulnerability in leadership to me is it's the most powerful form of leadership, to be honest. And so it was a stark contrast for me in terms of how I would have dealt with something like that. As a Black woman, I have this suit of armor up, and we'll talk about that when we get to me. And so I was curious about what was different that got you to that level of comfort, that you felt you could bring that authenticity and vulnerability to your leaders and to your team, because that's a piece of me I would hold close.
Yeah.
And is there a privilege there to your ability to do that?
Yeah, I definitely think there is. And when we were chatting and I was reflecting on it, part of it was I went through this journey as a leader. I was a director in the firm and now partner, and I'm still going through it. So I have privilege there that I can set the rules. If I'm telling people to be authentic, I'm sure as heck going to be authentic. So I felt I could say it without any repercussions. I think also I had built up enough credibility with myself that I didn't think it would hurt my career. I also do use that as a piece of my leadership style. I'm very high emotional IQ, empathy, so it did come naturally. But I also think, part of it, you kind of just learn it. You can't put your finger on why you feel comfortable or not. But I just remember, interviewing at PwC, and I, met with Arthur, and I said straight up, I'm going to be totally transparent. I'm coming to you. I'm going through an IVF journey, and I hope to God that when I join this firm, I'm going to be pregnant. And I just put it out there. And I guess following his cue, there was no, why are you bringing this up? Or we need to talk about it. It was just great. What can I do? I hope it's successful. And throughout my journey, he's called us when we were in the hospital. So I just think I've never felt that when I've said it, somebody has balked and that I needed to retract or go into my shell. And also, I think, and you said it, Tawana, in one of your panels, I have the power of my feet because I am privileged that I'm Bermudian. I come from financial privilege. If the firm didn't support me, I'll walk. And I was able to do that. Others are not so lucky, and that's I think what you mentioned in your panel, that they can't take that risk. I could.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks, Megan. That's so authentic.
I think so, and just having that level of awareness, because even when you say to your staff, I want you to be authentic, authenticity can also be construed as, there's a bias to whatever the dominant corporate culture is, right? That type of authenticity. So expressing values in accordance with that, it's fine.
Yes.
Otherwise, well, we don't really want that much authenticity. So that's interesting, and I will also say that I think it's commendable that you felt that you could express about going through your journey, because when I was on the Human Rights Commission, most people thought that it was race or ethnicity that we got the most complaints about, and it was actually women and maternity. There were numerous women who didn't get hired because they were pregnant, or who got fired or passed over for promotions when they were pregnant, or when they were, after they had given birth. So I think that's commendable, because a lot of times that's not something we focus on, but it's literally the highest volume of cases that we saw when I was at the HRC. And so thank you for sharing that. And Natasha, thank you for picking up on that point about privilege and vulnerability, and feeling comfortable to show those emotions. And I think that's a perfect segue into your journey. And what I will just say is that, for some of the audience who may not appreciate this, and I said this in the panel, and then when we were having our discussion, and then I said to Natasha, I hope I didn't offend you, but I said, when I see you, I see somebody who is othered and then othered again, because, you are Black, so people assume, okay, you're Black, but you're a Black non-Bermudian. So then you have that challenge of being accepted by the Black Bermudian community as well, which I think is a layer and a dynamic that a lot of people that aren't of color wouldn't appreciate. So I'm really intrigued and interested in hearing your journey and whether or not you felt you can be vulnerable, and how that's changed, or where you are in that journey.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tawana. And I love coming after Megan, because it's such a juxtaposition in terms of the stories and approach, and your story is so powerful. Can I be authentic in the workplace? Yes, absolutely. I've built up the capital over the years to get to a place where I feel that I can be authentic if I'm ready. The question is, am I ready? And I talked about this suit of armor I have over the years, and hopefully you'll stay with me on this journey. It's a little long and windy, but this journey is what's created this suit of armor that makes it difficult for me to answer that second question. And so I'm originally from Trinidad, as most of you know, bottom of the West Indies, most southerly island in the Caribbean, 1.5 million people. And we are a happy, free living culture. We have leadership positions of people that look like me. So I grew up never questioning my ability to be in a senior leadership position. Why? Every boardroom that I saw, my father himself was an economist, all of the great schools, my politicians, they generally looked like me. So there was never a question in my head. I went to the University of the West Indies, proud graduate of that school, both Cape Hill and Trinidad campus, highly competitive. I was amongst the most brilliant people in my region. I went to Hewitting Law School, again, props to my country, because I was taught by brilliant judges and academics, and I was constantly challenged on a daily basis. I never questioned my abilities, because I always had to be the best amongst the best. I left Trinidad, and it's the first part of the armor that begins to form. When you go somewhere that you're not from, it challenges you, right? There's a point there where I need to be a bit brave. And so my first foray was into the BVI, international business as well. I wanted to travel the world. I didn't want to stay at home. And that was the first part of the armor, because I started working with people that didn't look like me. My first boss was a white man, turned out to be a great ally. And since then, many of my allies, and I'm thankful for these white men that have helped shape my career, because many of them have been my allies. But I started realizing quite quickly, oh, I'm different, and I sound different. When I'm on these conference calls and I'm talking to people from Asia and the US, they ask, oh, where are you from? And all of a sudden I felt this inherent need to start assimilating. From BVI, I moved to London. Oh my God, the armor started getting even heavier at that point. I'll never forget going to a law firm. It was a closing transaction. I'm there to bring the documents in to help with close. This was a major Magic Circle law firm. And they looked at me and said, oh, are you the courier? Meanwhile, I'm dressed to the nines.
Oh, cool.
And so I was like, no, I'm here to assist with closing. What do you mean? But that wasn't my initial reaction. Obviously, I'm a young lawyer. I have all this insecurity, but what can I say? Should I respond a certain way? I responded kindly, no, sir, I'm here to assist with closing. In the back of my mind, I wanted to say so many other things, right? But it's all those things. I actually had my senior partner at that point was also a Black Trinidadian man. He became one of my key mentors because seeing him in his journey was also helpful for me. As I moved from London to Bermuda, I think this is where the armor solidified itself. I moved to a jurisdiction that's majority Black in population, yet international business, and the people that you see sitting in the C-suites don't represent the population. I showed up in rooms where, again, I was more than in the minority. More than likely, I would be not only the Black face at these meetings, but the only Black woman. And so as a result, all of these things that I experienced over the years, again, I'll give a story about showing up at a board meeting. The board didn't know me at that point, but I was there to present something. Dressed to the nines, I like to dress, I think I dress well. I show up and I put my materials on the desk. One of the senior board members looks at me and he's like, confused. I can see it on his face. He's like, about to ask me for coffee. I can see it, it's coming out. Can you get? And the lady comes by and asks him, can I get you a cup of coffee? And it's as I sit down and I begin to present, the confusion turns into shock and horror at the mistake he was about to make. And so a lot of those assumptions have followed me throughout my career. Despite that, I've pushed past. Despite that, I've progressed, again, because of key allies in my life. I say all that for you to hopefully get the context of why the armor is super, super heavy. I show up at the office with a hard face on. My team always thinks I'm in a bad mood, but I'm not. It's just that it's my outward appearance of control. And so this all culminated in what I want to call my summer of hell, which was my father had passed. I had my right-hand family member on his deathbed. I was devastated, worried, concerned, traveling back and forth, trying to figure out would he live. My mother, meanwhile, is going through her own struggles. I have so many titles, as many of us do, right? I'm a mother, a daughter, a wife, a teacher, a mentor, an aunt, all of these things in addition to my job. And the personal part of my life started to converge on all of the leadership things I needed to do. Be the strong leader for the office, strong leader for my team, show up at the office, be purposeful and perfect. This self-imposed need to be perfect because of everything that I felt I was being judged for. And this one day, I just couldn't do it. Everything had kind of converged on me, and I describe it like, imagine you're freediving. I'm obsessed with that sport now because of the extremity of it. People are diving to 163 feet in the ocean with no tank, just their oxygen in their lungs. So imagine this compression that you feel as you're going down. And that's what I was feeling in this particular day. The armor started going in, my lungs compressed, everything started to just fall in on me. This has never happened before. I'm a strong woman. I feel like I have all this together. This one particular day was not that day. And my team doesn't know this. My office doesn't know this because I called my husband. I said, something's off. I can't function right now. This has never happened to me. I'm not in control. And between him and my therapist, they were like, go home. Your team and people can't see you like this. I had back-to-back meetings like I always do, canceled them all, went home, took the afternoon. Just breathe. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to see anyone. I just needed a moment to just have that realness. And so I came back the next day fine. I was able to compartmentalize, put the pieces back together, put the armor back on and go in next day. Again, with no one knowing outside of my inner circle. And so I say all that to say, I struggle, even to this day, with being vulnerable in leadership. And that path, the path to getting to where I am now, has been a long one full of a bunch of assumptions from people who don't know me until I open my mouth. To this day, people will say to me, how'd you get that job? I still get asked that because there's a surprise when I walk into the room that am I meant to be there? And so some of this is those external circumstances, but a lot of this armor that I have is self-imposed. And so that is my continued journey to being authentic. I want, and now they know, because hopefully they're live streaming it, the team in the office will know that I have my own struggles, and being vulnerable and honest and open with you about it is one of them, which is why I thought Megan's story was so powerful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And like you said, I think it's great that you were after Megan because where you felt, okay, I can do this, I can be vulnerable and dealt with it, you handled it in another way because, and I do think it's because of the fact that you are still other and not in the dominant culture of international business,
right.
despite your success.
That's right.
And I this whole concept. So when people approach you with this, how did you get this job, or with a query about, oh, because I'll tell you what I used to get all the time, but much less so, was, I know your boss. And I say, no, you don't know my boss. I bet you've never met my boss in your life. So whoever you think I work for, I don't. So how do you deal with, how did you get this job, or,
Oh my God. So like, my husband will tell you I'm a firecracker. What comes to my head is what usually comes out the mouth. And these are the times where I'm actually reserved, because it's usually in a setting like this. It's happened in a room full of other, white men, or, other. I will say it's happened in a table full of white men before, where you're like, oh my God, should I just tell you to absolutely go fly off a cliff? That's what I want to say, but I can't say that. So my initial reaction back in the day used to be to then justify how I got there. I'd start listing off my CV. Oh, well, I did this, and I worked here first, and I spent all these years. And then I started realizing, again, after talking to my therapist, that does not make sense. Why are you justifying your existence? Sometimes it's better to pose the question back. Because when you pose the question back, it makes the person think, what did I mean by that? So when I get these questions now, I'm like, tell me, what do you mean by that? What do you mean how I got this job? And then it'll make the person pause and think, well, what did I mean by that?
Yeah.
Am I saying that she shouldn't have that role?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's better to pose it back to the person.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And Trevor, last but certainly not least, as I mentioned, Trevor said something when we were prepping for this panel that made me think. And I'll preface this with saying, and I said it when we were prepping too, because I can be quite blunt. I don't know any other way. But I think, there are certain of us that don't get to choose how we show up, right? If we walk in the room, we're black. If we walk in the room, we're big, we're big. If we walk in the room and we have a disability of some sort, that's, we don't get to choose how we show up every day. And so for us, it may be a disadvantage, but it's also something that we actually don't have to think about every day to make that choice. I'm going to be black today and walk into this room. But Trevor said something that made me think about how there is a choice he makes when he meets new people or when he's discussing things. And so Trevor, let's hear about your journey and tell us about that mindset and decision-making process.
So thank you everybody for being here. So we'll go back a few years. So I started my career in 2014 in the US. I grew up outside Chicago, fairly conservative family. I was raised in a Catholic church and all of that, and I always struggled with my sexuality, and so I decided to come out when I was 18, so relatively early than compared, to some people. When I did, I was very lucky. I did not lose friends. I didn't lose family. I probably actually gained friends because everybody wanted to be friends with the gay guy on campus. But I never had a bad experience. So when I was at university and I was going through recruitment for school, I kind of always thought to myself, maybe I won't display who I am right away or let people know who I am. And that became a challenge for me because I share everything. Like working in public accounting in the audit room, I'm constantly talking to people. And not just about work, but just about, I want to learn about people. And so it became a challenge for me. And so it wasn't very long. And I can remember I'm sitting at lunch with my senior, and he's talking about the weekend and his wife and whatever. And I'm like, well, why does he get to talk about that? Why can't I talk about my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband? I'm like, why can't I talk about that stuff? So I made a comment about how, I'm going to spend time with my boyfriend or, what have you, and he didn't bat an eye. And I was like, okay, this is easy, because, but that's not, you don't come out, I think this is what you're getting to. You don't come out just one time. You have to choose every single day who, I'm getting emotional, who do I want to share myself with? who's going to take it the wrong way, who's going to take it the right way. And so, long story short, I slowly decided, share a little bit here, share a little bit there, and was never an issue. So and probably because I never had an issue, it always got easier, right? So, yeah, I mean, the thing for me was like, it's so hard. You feel so isolated when you're hiding something. And, I want to talk about the exciting things going on in my life. I want to talk about getting engaged and getting married and moving, and we got a dog, and, you have to be able to, in order to do that, you have to be authentic, right? And you have to, I just always think to myself, if you have a problem, I'm to the point now where I'm like, if you have a problem with it, then like, I don't really care, to be honest. Because I know that at the end of the day, I have a support system. I work for a firm that backs me. And so it always got a little bit easier, but I mean, you're exactly right. Like, I get to choose. I could have chosen not to say anything ever to this day, and it would be a much different story. So, I get to choose, and I chose the path that a lot of people don't because they're scared about what the reaction is going to be or how that might hinder them with their success. And so, similar to imposter syndrome, I can't help but think, if I were to ever make it in terms of director or partner, did I make it because I'm good at my job and I deserve to be here? Or did I make it because I'm gay and we need a diversity number? And not saying that is happening, but it's just one of those things that's always in the back of your mind.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think what I'd like to know is, when you make that choice, when you decide I'm going to reveal a piece of myself, this piece of myself to somebody. So for instance, PwC, when you were thinking about moving here and working with PwC, wait, you worked with PwC in the States first?
I did not. I worked for another firm.
Okay,
yeah.
Right. So when you decided to move and work with PwC, what did they say or do, or can you explain or verbalize how and why you felt comfortable to share that piece of yourself with them?
I was very transparent. I said, well, let me first say that I researched Bermuda before coming, and it was a little discouraging to learn that they were the only country in the world that passed gay marriage and then were legally fighting to repeal it and make it illegal again. And so that was one thing. I had long talks with my husband, and we expected it to be challenging, right? We can't go to a gay bar and find a community of people that are like us. So we knew that was going to be a challenge, but it was such a great opportunity, and it really was the work that I wanted to do. And so I was very transparent. I said, I'm coming with my husband, and I want to be involved in inclusion and diversity, and what does PwC do on the island? I turned it around on them and I can remember who I interviewed with, but I said, you have to tell me what you do on the island, because sell yourself to me, because that was something that was important to me. And even, through recruiting, I never felt like it was an issue. I was impressed with the way that PwC was involved in the community. I knew instantly that I was going to have a support system, and I knew that even though it was a conservative place to be as an out LGBT individual, it wasn't going to be that big of a deal. And I think a lot of that came from, my husband's from the South, and so we spent, before moving to London, we were part of the American South, and it was very conservative. And I learned quickly that, in a lot of these deep Southern places, there's a lot of people struggling because they're scared of the repercussions. And so to me, it became more about visibility in the workplace. And how does me being out make a difference for other people? And if one person that's struggling can see that you can be successful in the workplace as an out LGBT individual, then if one person can see that that's okay, then my job is done. And so that was what it was about to me, was how can I, my story, it's not a bad story. I'm very privileged in the way when I came out and I didn't lose friends and anything. And so that was the whole thing for me, was just being visible. And I'm not going to let that, I'm not going to let this stand in between me and my career and what I want to do. And if anything, this is actually more of a reason for me to come, because I can be the driver of change.
Yep, thank you for that. And also thank you for talking and discussing about how that was something that you turned back on PwC, which we also realize, right, when somebody really wants to hire you, you do have that privilege of saying, where do you stand on this role, and on what do you stand, and how do you stand for it, and what can you do to help me and help us. And so I'm mindful of the time, and what I want from the panelists, and you can answer this in any way that you want before we open it up. If we have time for Q&A, I'm not sure. Okay, but I guess we'll come back to Kyle and work our way down, right? And I'm going to pose the question a little bit differently than it's written and then we discussed it. You're sitting Kyle down when he gets approached to accept the role either first time or second time at the authority, the CEO role, the temporary CEO role. Knowing what you know and what will happen, what advice would you tell Kyle?
Wow, okay. I think I would say to him that you have to place your value outside of your progression in your professional career. And you are good whether people recognize it or not.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Megan, question for you. You have a young woman, junior accountant, and she comes to you and says that she admires what you've done, but she's going through the journey, and she is uncomfortable sharing that with her mostly, male team, younger male team. What advice do you give her?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this doesn't really have to be hypothetical because this happens a lot. Yeah, and I said after sharing my story, and this is why I say it is such a prevalent topic, the number of women in our firm that have approached me to say they're going through infertility, they're going through IVF, they've had a miscarriage, and I can't tell anybody, or I don't feel I can. And, you know, the one advice I always say is you can come to me. So at least you know you have somebody. I offer them also all the support networks I used. I give them the names of the groups and if they want to. And then I often touch base with them regularly. I almost am as into their journey as they are. But you know, when it comes to, they feel they can't discuss it with their bosses. Like, I think we have to recognize we do work in a predominantly male industry, particularly at the leadership level. And this conversation can be perceived as being awkward. Like, how do I sit down with my boss and talk about my ovaries and my uterus? You know, like this just feels uncomfortable. And, you know, I know we've given the guys a bit of a bashing over the last week, and some of it's very valid and I would agree, but sometimes I'd say just take a chance and it may surprise you. And as I said, I had one male partner who, you know, as soon as I describe him, everyone's gonna know who it is, but he's a confirmed bachelor. He views children as admin, and he will never have any that he is aware of. And he, you know, the typical guy that, like, if I have this conversation, it's gonna probably go horribly. And I was working with him when I first joined the firm, and it was when I was going through my journey with Tegan, and they said, you know, I was getting monitored so regularly, I had to miss a client meeting. And originally I was gonna cancel my doctor's appointment to go to the client meeting. And I didn't, thank God, because that was the doctor's appointment that they said you're walking across the street and you're going to the hospital, and then that was the end of it. So anyway, so I went to this partner and I said, you know, hey, such and such, like, I am not going to be able to attend this meeting, I've got to go to this doctor's. And he just looked at me and he went, yeah, I haven't gotten the training on that one yet. And it was so funny, and my husband and I laugh about it to this day, because I mean, this is the same partner that visited me in the maternity ward, probably feeling awkward as all hell. But that's why I say it will surprise you. And now this partner who I work with all the time, like, he knows everything about fertility. Like, when we went through Ethan, he was on the phone, like, are we pregnant? Are we pregnant? Like, he was so involved. And when I told him about the miscarriage last week, you know, it was I'll take over these calls, you don't have to be there, what do you need? So that's why I say sometimes just take a chance. Like I think we have a perception it's going to go badly, but if we really put ourselves out there, I think you'll be surprised.
So I think it's important, so, you know, find if you can identify an ally, right, as you are. And it could be somebody in the company or outside the company.
Yep.
It may not be necessary to share with everybody,
Yep.
but if you can just find somebody that you know can be a support,
Exactly.
and then I guess gauge
Yes.
when and how
Yeah.
to discuss it. And Natasha, you know, we talked briefly about this, and you said something when I said, like, what advice would you give to, you know, young Natasha, or what advice would you give to your mentees even now? But more importantly, I would like for you to reflect on perhaps one of the incidents that you mentioned, and if you would have approached that person that you realized made you put up a chink in your armor, or the type of incident that makes you put up a chink in your armor differently, how would you tell Natasha to deal with that?
Okay, so a couple of things. I think for me, a lot of everything I described for you was self-imposed, in that I never tried to be vulnerable. Let's be clear. I never, like Megan said, you know, take the chance. I never took the chance. And if I had, who knows the response I would have gotten from leadership, from people around me. So I wanted to caveat some of what I said by starting with that. And then secondly, to reconfirm for everyone that these stories did not occur in my current position, just so we're clear. And so what would I say to young Natasha? You know, you are more than enough. And keep remembering that. You are more than enough. You're not going to be everything for everyone, and you're not meant to be perfect. Silence that annoying self-critic. She is difficult. She doesn't have your best interests at heart. She's there to constantly challenge, which is a good thing, but she also puts you down a lot. So you're more than enough. And, you know, we don't half die, so don't half live. Why not take the opportunity when it's presented? If that happened to me now, I would probably react differently, like we discussed. To young Natasha, it's okay to question. It's okay to answer back respectfully. It's okay to be a bit more open with your authenticity, because you are more than enough. That's what I'd say.
Thank you. And Trevor, I'm going to ask you the question in a slightly different way. You run into somebody who tells you, I'm not comfortable with the choice that you've made to come out at work. It's not something that I would ever do. How do you deal with that person? How do you discuss your decision with that person who is of the LGBTQ community but says, I don't know why you feel the need, and I'm not comfortable, and it's not something I would do?
It's funny you asked that, actually, because I worked with somebody who was like that, and we were very good friends. And he told me once, he's like, I could never do that. I just could never do it. And I'm like, well, you know, that's fine. You, like we discussed, like you have a choice, but you shouldn't ever feel that you can't because you won't be supported. And I think that the key point is that you will be supported whenever you make that decision. And I think a lot of times too, you think, oh, if I, you know, even if somebody comes to me and they're like, I don't want to say anything, or, you know, whatever, and they think that I'm going to go tell everyone that, oh, guess what, so-and-so, like, they're gay too, you know, like, and, you know, people, you will be supported, and you can share who you are without, like, it's not my story, like, it's not my coming out, it's yours, and you need to own it. And whenever you're comfortable and you're at the point that you want to, go for it, and don't look back. But in the meantime, like, I'm here to support you regardless if you're comfortable coming out at work or not.
And I think, just if I can touch on one thing, not to have the last word, but I think that's an important piece about it. It's your choice, it's your journey. And so I know, particularly with my story, I am very out there. I share it with everybody. That's not to say that if you're a female going through this and you don't, that I would look at you and think, well, you're not helping the cause, like, come on, speak up. I think everyone has to do it in their authentic way, and some people get the support and is authentic to share, and some people it's not. And so the real risk we have is where people want to share and feel they can't. That's the piece that I think we need to fix.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And we do have one other sort of piece that we can discuss, but I wanted to pause right now. Deshay, did we have any questions for the panelists? We do? Okay.
Yes, so we do have one question online from Crystal DuPont. It says, what are some tips when you felt safe, you were authentic, and you had something happen where you now don't feel safe to be authentic anymore?
And was that for one person in particular or a general question to the panel?
General.
So that's really interesting, and I can't answer for the panel, but I can certainly answer. I can certainly answer for myself while the panel thinks about it. When my marriage was breaking down, I remember calling my CEO and saying, look, I can't work from Bermuda right now, I need a break, right? I need to go work in the New York office. And he said, well, I guess things must be really bad because you know they don't like you in the New York office. And I was like, what? They don't like me in the New York office. And it was funny because, so I ended up going and working out of Norway for a bit. But what it made me realize was I wasn't presenting in the way in that office that I thought I was. And it made me question every time I flew up and went in, and it made me question how I interacted with people. And when I reflected on that, I realized that one of the mistakes that perhaps I had made was, when I was trying to run a project, they, were not really readily open to it. And so instead of addressing them directly, I just went to the CEO. And so then the next time I contacted them, they were open and helpful, and I was like, problem solved. But that perhaps in reflection was not the best way to deal with it. And so that was a time when I felt very, very vulnerable and was like, oh, wow, okay, so now I have to deal with this in addition to everything that's happening at home. And so one of the ways I've done that and try to overcome that is actually working individually on those relationships with people in that office and trying to be less my way or the highway and more of collaboration. I don't know if that answered the person's question, but for me, that's one of the times when I can say that I was raw, and to say, yeah, but also nobody likes you over there, that's a lot, right? So that's something I can think of at a time when I was vulnerable, and I was like, oh, wow, now I've got to deal with this work issue, too. I don't know if anybody on the panel has.
I think it comes down to trust. You have to, in that situation, I can only imagine feeling betrayed, that you were vulnerable, you shared something that was personal, I'm making an example, but you shared something that was personal and somebody betrayed you. And so you have to work to get that trust back. But I think, that person obviously wasn't meant to be the person that you can put confidence in, right? Find somebody who can't, like you have to start from square one and find the person that you can put trust into, and don't make it seem, or don't let it affect you in a way that like you're going to go back into your shell and like never do it again.
Yeah.
One thing I would add to that, so any of you watch Medea, about the angry black woman, and I think I'm the kind of person that generally I ask for what I feel like I deserve. And so there have been times in my career where I was nervous, gosh, if I ask too much or if I speak up and say, well, I'd like this promotion or I'd like this role, would I be viewed as aggressive? With all of those things and labels that I, again, probably self-imposed, too much Medea, gets ingrained in the front of my brain. And so I have had instances where, put on the cloak, okay, I'm going to do this. I think I've worked hard. It's happened a couple of times throughout the 20-year span where I've said, I've gone and I've asked for what I want. This is why I think I deserve it. These are all the reasons why. That was, you know, me being authentic, really thinking I'm being bold, I'm being forward, I deserve this. You know, some of the times that worked out well. You know, yeah, okay, good, glad to see that you felt this way. Some of the times it backfired in that, oh, you know, they think you're asking for too much. You're that person that's kind of, you're asking for a lot. And if you want to call it backfired, because that's how I view the question, have you ever been authentic, it backfired on what you did next? And for me, it has happened where I thought I was being bold. I was doing what a lot of my male counterparts were doing. It was viewed differently coming from me. I pushed through it, I moved past it. That then perception, those are places I ended up leaving because I felt like this is something that I'm seeing other people do it, but when I do it, I'm considered aggressive. So that, I don't know if that answers the question, but that was my share for that.
Thank you. Megan, Kyle?
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of an example where I was vulnerable and it backfired and I felt scared. Maybe I'm very privileged in my career that way. I will say I've been vulnerable and in a conversation and I maybe didn't get the response I wanted. But for me, like after losing Ethan, one of the best pieces of advice I received was from, she was either a nurse or a social worker, and it was the day after Ethan died and we went back to the hospital. And I said, you know, I'm really struggling to hold it together in front of Tegan, our daughter, and I have to because she doesn't deserve a sad mummy. And this woman said, no, Megan, like you have to lose it in front of her because this is how she will learn about grief. This is how she will build the skills to handle this in her lifetime and her future. And that has changed the way my husband and I have parented, but it's also changed the way I think about having these conversations because, you know, we talk about leadership and we talk about authenticity, but you know, let's be real, like a lot of leaders are just ill-equipped at having these conversations because they've never had to. They don't have those empathy muscles. We avoid tough conversations and awkward conversations. And so sometimes I say, you know, if it was, you know, a betrayal of trust or, you know, just blatantly someone giving you reason to feel scared, that's different. But maybe it was just somebody not knowing how to react. And I think through that it is about coaching and teaching and practice. You know, quite frankly.
Thank you, Megan. And before we wrap up, Kyle, did you?
I can keep it brief. Life and your career, if you do it right, is a long journey. And so there will be other opportunities to be authentic in the way in which it backfired. Look for those opportunities and seize them. And in the meantime, continue to progress. But it's a long journey. I know it feels like, you know, this just happened, but some of the stuff I was talking about was almost a decade ago. So.
Thank you. Thank you to our audience here and also online. I hope that you agree with me when I told you that you were going to be blown away by the vulnerability and transparency of our panelists. Thank you for your bravery. This has been one of the most touching but also informative and inspiring panels that I've ever had a pleasure to participate in. So thank you for joining us and thank you very much for telling us your story.
Thank you.
Thanks.